if you want to understand the Israeli-Arab conflict, you have to go into the roots. You can't just look at things as they're being reported in the news and think you can get a full understanding of what's happening. Because otherwise you can start drawing very, very uh, false conclusions about what's going on. We can be told that Hamas and others are resistance fighters, and what they're doing is based on all these legitimate grievances. If you don't understand that a conflict that's been going on really for 100 years is rooted in ideological hatreds, then you simply won't be able to figure out the way forward. We need to get to the roots, and so therefore I'm thrilled to be joined by historian Trudy Gold, who's been on the show many, many times, who's going to be talking to us about a very critical figure that probably isn't so well known. People that do read up a bit on the conflict start to hear this name banded about, but not that much, and that is about Hajj Amin Al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti, who is, I don't know whether, Trudy, if you would agree, but sort of considered like the first spiritual and political leader of the Palestinians. I don't know if you'd accept that characterization, but I think that this man, who in many ways was the first sort of representative of this group of Arabs that lived in then British Mandate Palestine, if we don't understand him and what was going on, basically a century ago, as basically paving the way, sowing the seeds of the roots of this conflict, then we simply won't get a handle on what's going on today. You need to understand history in order to understand the present. And so, Trudy, we thought it would be a great idea to devote an episode to talking about the Mufti. So I really, first of all, thank you so much for joining JTV again, as always, and for being a regular on JTV. And could we start off by just, I really want to give this over to you. I think we've spoken through many different headlines of things you want to talk about with regards to the Mufti. I think the best thing to do would just be for you to kind of talk to our viewers. And if I have questions or things that aren't clear, then I'll just interject.
Yes, thanks very much, Ollie. Yes, you're correct. He was seen as the leader of Palestinian Arabs, which turned out to be a terrible tragedy for them. And I think one of the tragedies of the people is that they've had bad leadership from the beginning. And it must be said, at the time of his birth and at the time of his whole life, there were other families, important Palestinian families, who had a very different view. And if it had gone another way, I don't think we would be in the horrific situation that we're in today. He is absolutely seminal to understanding the roots of the conflict. And the other thing, which is so complicated, we're going to have to look at what happened at the end of the First World War. Now, so let's talk a little bit about who he was. He was born in Jerusalem. He was the son of the Mufti Tahir, and he came from a very wealthy landowning family in Jerusalem, south of Jerusalem. 13 members of his family had been formerly mayors of Jerusalem. There was about 6 important families, and they all vied really for positions in society. He studied in Jerusalem. Ironically, he went to an Alliance school. The Alliance was an organization that had been set up in France by the equivalent of the French Board of Deputies to spread French culture. And one of the schools he went to was a Jewish school, but it was run by a man who was not pro-Zionist. He also went to Cairo. He studied law in Cairo for a short while. And there he came under the influence of a very interesting man, Rashid Rida, who was a Salafi intellectual. Now, Salafism was a movement in Islam to purify Islam, to go back to a real belief in the basics. And this man's going to have an influence on him right until his death. His guru dies in 1935. Now, World War One, he was commissioned into the Ottoman army. One of the problems, I think, of understanding the roots of the conflict is it's so very complicated. Can we see the map, please, of the Ottoman Empire?
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes, because I want you to take out of your minds all the states you know today: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, Israel. At this stage, they are all districts within the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, which was called by the British the sick man of Europe, it was on its last legs, and this is now ranged up against the British, the French, and the Russians. The Ottomans sided with the Germans and the Austrians. This is the horror of the First World War. And in the First World War, he joins the Ottoman army. He was wounded and he was stationed in Izmir, and then he returns to Jerusalem just as General Allenby is entering the city. Now, it's important to remember that Britain had its army on the ground in the Middle East. One of the most extraordinary aspects of the whole roots of the Arab-Israeli conflict, I'm going to say it's in the colonial powers fighting each other, the French and the British, that are going to lead to so much trouble. Because even though Britain was allied to France, there's an extraordinary memo from the Foreign Office saying that in any future dealings, they have to be careful of French and Russian empire building. Well, the Russians are out of it. You've had the revolution and then the Bolshevik Revolution. Both of them wanted hegemony in the Middle East, but the British had boots on the ground. And not only that, what is the best way to win a war? The Turks ruled over many different peoples. Now, there was no problem for a Muslim to be ruled by a Muslim, but the Arabs, the Arab Muslims, be they Sunni or Shia, had a great and glorious history. And in the First World War, the British really stirred up Arab nationalism. They dealt with a man called the Emir Hussein, Sheriff of Mecca. He had sons, two of whom were Faisal and Abdullah. And with the British Army officer Lawrence, Faisal joined the British in the war against the Turks. Now, the British take Jerusalem. They move on. They had done a secret deal with the French that once the war was over, everything sort of north of what is now Israel and all the way out would be the French, and to the south would be the British. They're going to carve up the Middle East. Allenby, even though Damascus and that whole region had been promised to the French, he sends Faisal's army in with Lawrence of Arabia. It sent shock waves of nationalism throughout the whole Arab world. And Hajj Amin himself was with the Sharifian army taking Damascus. Now, once the war is over, there's shouts of joy and exultation, because Damascus was once the seat of one of the most important Arab dynasties, going back to the beginnings of Islam. Now, the British had also made promise to the Zionists. They promised them a home in the Middle East. And a victorious Emir Faisal writes a letter to Felix Frankfurter, who was an American Zionist lawyer. He now believes he's going to have his state. There's a conference in Syria that Hajj Amin goes to, and they're going to have a state. And it's important to remember this area that we now call Palestine, Israel, was pretty unimportant. What they dreamt of was a pan-Arab empire centered on Damascus. Now, this is terribly important. This is not Palestinian nationalism, Lebanese nationalism, or whatever. This is pan-Arabism. And if you want to take that further, in 1958, Gamal Abdel Nasser, in control of Egypt, did a deal with Syria. They created the United Arab Republic. So he is full of the enthusiasm. He is supporting Faisal. And this is the letter that Faisal writes. I think this is really going to shock you. We Arabs, especially the educated amongst us, look with deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. We wish the Jews a hearty welcome home. We are working together for a reformed and revised Near East, and our two movements complement each other. The movement is nationalistic and not imperialistic. There is room in Syria, Greater Syria, for us both. Indeed, I think that neither could be successful without the other. And what is fascinating, Lawrence of Arabia also had that view, this sort of mysticism about the Jews. If the Jews come to the Middle East with their talents, they can help develop the area, and that will develop the Arab world. And there are letters between Hussein and Weizmann. The Zionists, of course, believe that they're going to have their entity now in the Middle East. Why can't the two work together? And then it all goes wrong. Bearing in mind that he is a very strong supporter of the Sharifian monarchy. At San Remo, where the victorious Allied powers divide up the Middle East, the British let the French have their way. And the French are granted a mandate on Syria, out of which they carve Lebanon. The British are given Palestine and Iraq. A mandate is a device where a colonial power takes power to bring the inhabitants to self-rule. The Balfour Declaration, which promises the Jews a homeland in Palestine, is written into the mandate on Palestine. Now let's have a look at the maps, please. Can we have a look at Palestine? Now, this is part of the drawing up. Do you see Syria? And I told you already, the French carve out Lebanon into a separate region because of the minority Christians, the Druze. And you will see that the black line of Palestine incorporates what today is Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jordan. Okay, let's leave that there. Now, the French enter Damascus and there is a battle. It takes 4 hours for the French to defeat the Arab army, of which Hajj Amin is taking part. Disappointed nationalism. Their dream is over. The British try to solve the problem. They have the mandate on Iraq, so they make Faisal king of Iraq. Later on, they're going to make his brother king of Jordan. So going on, Hajj Amin comes back to Palestine. He is already incredibly disillusioned, disappointed in Arab nationalism as a concept, although because remember this notion of Arab nationalism was to bring them all together. The Jews have won, he's lost. And not only that, before the political administration arrives in Palestine, you have military rule. And it has to be said that a lot of the army officers, particularly those that had come from fighting the Bolsheviks in Russia, because, you know, at the end of the war, the British sent troops into Russia, along with the French, to fight the Bolsheviks. And who were they fighting with? They were fighting with the white Russian armies. Now, don't forget how many people of Jewish birth were involved in the leadership of the Communist Revolution. It was Trotsky, Lev Davidovich Bronstein, who created the Red Army. He was number one monster as far as they were concerned. Back in Tsarist times, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion had been published. That terrible, terrible forgery that is going to have so much damage, so much so that there is a book by Norman Conn called Warrant for Genocide. Many of the British officers who are fighting with the White Army, who are totally imbued with and bring the protocols back with them to Palestine. The atmosphere is boiling, and then you have the Nebi Musa riots. Of course, Nebi Musa, the feast of Moses, is Passover. And there is an Arab revolt. There is in the city of Jerusalem. Already there had been a revolt up in Tel Hai, where the great hero of Zionism, Joseph Trumpeldor, had been murdered by Arab insurrectionists. There's unrest in the Mandate, but it's only a military administration. And certainly, certain members of the high ranking officers were very anti Zionist, going over to anti Semitism. Weizmann begged that the British send more troops. They smelt something was happening. Haj Amin is beginning to make big speeches, so is his uncle. There's a whole group of people now who are saying, we don't want Jews in Palestine, it should be an Arab state.
And what was motivating that we don't want Jews here? Is it what would you
Because
pin it
they
down
feel
to?
they've lost the dream. Their dream was a great Arab nation. And now they've got a British administration, and it's appeared to them the Zionists had won. Now, you could make the case, in the end, could there really have been an accommodation? That letter I read to you is actually
Yeah,
heartbreaking, because I
yeah.
think if you'd had different leadership on both sides, if Faisal had become ruler of Syria, I think it could have been pulled off. But what happens is the Jews organize their own self-defense. There is fighting. Jews die, Arabs die. Jabotinsky, who had fought for the British, who realized they'd betrayed, in his view, they'd betrayed the Jews. He is leading the Haganah in Jerusalem. He is arrested and imprisoned. Haj Amin is also found guilty, but he escapes. It's not until the first High Commissioner comes back that there's a moratorium. And with Jabotinsky being imprisoned, by the way, this led to incredible rift in the Zionist movement. And this is the beginning of how do we deal. From that time on, Jabotinsky took a very, very different view from Chaim Weizmann, who believed the British were honourable and one day they would come through. So Sir Herbert Samuel comes to Palestine as the first British High Commissioner. He is a Jew and a Zionist, but he works for the British. He is a British official, and he feels he's got to have an even-handed policy. The post of Mufti of Jerusalem is vacant. There are lots of families. Who should it go to? And the balance of power, without really, I think, giving it much thought, he appointed Haj Amin. I shouldn't use the word before that, because Hajj is when he takes on the turban. They appointed him Mufti of Jerusalem, which gives him incredible power, because he is now guardian of the Arab holy places. And he has this great ambition to restore the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I don't know if you've ever seen footage of the Dome of the Rock area, and you will see how run down the mosque was.
Mm.
He wants
Yeah,
to
yeah,
restore it. He wants to make Jerusalem the third city of Islam. And
yeah.
ironically, it's a British officer called Colonel Richmond, who's a Catholic, and he's an antiquities expert who's going to chafe him along. So, what
Trudy,
is,
was Herbert Samuel aware of Husseini's radicalism, or was it quite a spur of the moment
I think it
decision?
was a very ill thought, ill advised move.
Yeah.
So he's now Mufti. He has become more and more hardened. He believes that this area should be an Arab area. Meanwhile, Churchill, as colonial secretary, has got involved in the situation. He thinks he can solve it. Let's have a look at the map again. The one of the He thinks he can solve it if he chops off 2/3 of the British mandate on Palestine and creates an Arab kingdom of Jordan, which is closed to Jewish settlement. And who will rule it but Faisal's brother, Abdullah, who'd also fought for the British.
So he actually did this as a way to basically just appease the Arabs, and
Well, Churchill was passionately in favour of Zionism, no question. And he also he believed he could set up two states.
so this was the first two-state solution in a way.
Yeah, yeah. But Jordan no Jews could settle in Jordan, but he was met already with huge protests. There was huge protests from the Arabs in Palestine who are becoming radicalized under the tutorship of Haj Amin. And so the events go on in the 20s. And then in 1929, there is a big incident. Some houses had been destroyed near the mount to make it easier for Jewish worshippers to go to the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, the holiest site. And not only that, but a partition had been made between men and women. Up until then, men and women, there was no partition at the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. Plus, it has to be said that Jabotinsky had founded his own young group, Betar, and they were becoming more and more forceful. There were marches, and as a result of that, it all erupted. There were killings, there were terrible riots and murders in Jerusalem. It spreads to Sfat, and it spreads to Hebron. And the British do what the British always do. They hold an inquiry, and they decide that even though they gave most of the blame to the Arabs, it was because the Arabs were frightened of Jewish immigration. So the British government, you see, the British are there for their own interests. Why are the British in Palestine anyway? It's that three-letter word, isn't it? They want oil. They want an empire that stretches from Suez. Remember, they control Egypt all the way to India. That was always the dream, plus oil. Meanwhile, there's trouble in the Hejaz, and Faisal and Abdullah's father, Hussein, is going to be evicted by a Wahhabi tribe in the middle of the desert called the Sauds. Okay, so Arab politics are very volatile, and not only that, so there's huge enmity between the ruler of Iraq, the ruler of Jordan, and the ruler of Saudi Arabia. So this is how it all comes together. And in the 20s, late 20s, early 30s, the Mufti is pushing and pushing and pushing. So the British decide that they're going to stop Jewish immigration unless because what happens is they use the term economic absorptive capacity. And remember 1929, the Wall Street crash. There was poverty everywhere. And what the British decide to do is to link absorptive capacity. If there's one unemployed Arab, Jews can't come into Palestine. Now, this is an absolute uproar. It breaks Weizmann, but he has got support in England. And the other side of Britain, which believed in Zionism, they altered the white paper, and so it could be economic absorptive capacity only applied to the Jews. But Jabotinsky, of course, is completely disillusioned. Weizmann still believes the British are going to come through. As far as the Jews are concerned, you've got the up-and-coming people like Ben Gurion, the left-wing Zionists, with their dreams, the settling on the kibbutzim, etc., etc. And so it goes on. And in 1933, Hitler comes to power in Germany, committed to a Judenrein Reich. Now, up until 1933, about 215,000 Jews had come to Palestine as Zionist settlers. But now you have a situation, a Judenrein Reich. Hitler was prepared to let Jews go, provided they had somewhere to come to. And the Zionists, of course, they wanted their co-religionists, their co-nation as they saw it. And I don't know if you know this, but Jews could actually get out of Germany as late as summer of 41.
Wow.
In fact, one of the reasons that I think you see the Israelis taking such a tough line with the world, now whether this is right or wrong, but I want you to think psychology. There's no doubt that German and Austrian Jewry could have been saved in its entirety if the countries of the world, they met at Evian in July 1938, if they'd been prepared to allow more refugees in. After the Evian conference, Goebbels even wrote in his diary, we savages are better than the so-called civilized world. We do what we say and we do. So basically, you have a horror story emerging for the Jewish people. Never has Zionism been more needed. And in fact, nearly 200,000 German Jews do make it to Palestine. And of course, they completely changed the nature of the mandate. Now, Haj Amin al-Husseini, he also has access as the Mufti to Arabs throughout French areas, British areas, etc. He creates the Pan-Arab Congress. And that's going to be very, very important. As a response to more and more Jewish immigration, he calls a strike, and there are riots, and there is an Arab revolt that lasts from 36 to 39. The
Wow.
British try and solve the problem. Lord Peel comes to Palestine with a whole group of inquirers, and they decide the safe thing to do is to divide up that one third that was still left into a Palestinian area and a Jewish area. But the Mufti completely rejects it. This is
I want to get the map up so people can see this.
this is the Peel
Um,
Commission. You want the Peel partition
yeah,
map,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've got it, got it.
which is a different one. Have you got it? I can.
Yeah, yeah. Hold on, hold on. This is such an important map for people to see because the Arabs would have the majority of even the remaining parts of the land, right? Here.
Yeah. Mm, yeah. You see what they're giving. Israel will have that blue. The Jews will have the blue, and Jerusalem was to be international.
Yeah,
And there you see. That's
yeah,
about the size of Wales. It's less than the size of Wales. But that's what the Peel Commission decided. They took evidence from Arab leaders, Jewish leaders, Zionists, leaders in Palestine, British leaders, and Lloyd George, for example, Churchill. They all gave evidence before the Peel Commission. So did Jabotinsky and Weizmann. Weizmann,
were the Zionist leaders really disappointed with the PL Commission, or were they just like, we'll take whatever we can get?
they were disappointed, but they realised that this is the point. People talk about Jewish power. This is total Jewish powerlessness.
Right, right, right.
Jabotinsky, he begged, when he gave his address to the Royal Commission, he said, I am Oliver Twist. I'm asking for more. But what does that mean? I need enough to sustain life. In
Yes.
1938, in Poland, he gave the most heartbreaking speech on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day of mourning, where he said, the apocalypse is coming.
Wow.
Weizmann, Ben Gurion, they couldn't predict the Shoah, but you knew
Yeah.
something appalling was happening because it's not just Germany and Austria after the Anschluss. From 36 onwards, you had a totally anti-Semitic regime in Poland. Eastern Europe, it was bristling. Even in Britain and America, think the black shirts, think the German Bund in America, think some of the characters like Henry Ford or the great hero of America, Lindbergh. Anti-Semitism
Yeah.
was palpable. It was fascinating. They talked about Jewish power, like the Jews control Hollywood, the Jews control the media, but the reality, it's exactly the same kind of rubbish you get today, but it's powerlessness. And I think personally, we don't want to go down this rabbit warren today, but I
Yeah.
think it's the demonization of the Jew for 2,000 years in monotheism.
Yeah.
That's another story. I'll throw
Yeah.
you that line, but it's another story. The British decide, the government decides, even though the Peel Commission recommended it, they're not going to go for it because the decision has been made to appease the Arabs. There's even a
Wow.
letter that Chamberlain wrote. He basically, if we have to upset someone, we have to upset the Jews. And in May 1939, the British issue the White Paper on Palestine, which restricts Jewish immigration to 15,000 a year for 5 years. Then whoever has the majority has the state. Now, Haj Amin al-Husseini, by the way, he is not. He's been thrown out of Palestine because he'd led the riots and he'd led the fight against the British.
Where was he thrown out to?
Oh, he travels around. He's already beginning to court the Nazis. As early as 1933, he did make overtures, but the Nazis at that stage, he actually made the first approach on the 5th of March 1933 because he thought their aims coincided.
Wow.
At first, the Germans didn't actually take him very seriously. The end, we find him in Iraq, where he is involved in the Rashid Ali uprising. Iraq is a British mandate, remember,
Hmm.
and there is an uprising, and there is a terrible pogrom, which he was implicated in. Terrible pogrom in Iraq in 1941. Nobody talks about that side.
I actually know. We had someone staying with my family for a few months. This young guy who's of Iraqi descent, and his uh, grandparents fled to Palestine in early 40s because the persecution was so horrendous. In fact, what
Mm.
they did was put I think his the great grandparents put the children in a basically some kind of truck and hid them in a transportation of food, and they didn't see each other for years until Israel was established, and then amazing. But people have no
And
idea about this.
nobody has talks about what happened to the Jews from the Arab world. Some
Mm.
of the great communities that were destroyed. So anyway, what happens? He's in Iraq, up to his neck in conspiracy. You see, back in Palestine, he'd created all these interesting clubs, Arab clubs, which were kind of underground, rather sinister. And it was through a group of army officers, this appalling pogrom. And ironically, the British army was on the outskirts of the city and they didn't intervene. There's a very famous story of one of the British officers who wanted to know why. The other point to make is, of course, the British are having real problems with certain aspects of Jewish politics in Palestine because though Jabotinsky died in 1940, when war broke out, look, in 1939, after the White Paper, there was already a group called the Irgun, which was made up mainly of followers of Jabotinsky. And they were making as much trouble for the British as possible because they felt the British were betraying the Jews. When war broke out, though, both the Irgun and the Haganah did attempt to join the British Army. They weren't allowed in for a long time, and that's a very interesting story in itself. But a breakaway group led by Ephraim Stern declared war on the British. So the British having a lot of trouble. So the British Army, they're not going to be very pro-Jewish anyway.
Mm.
But meanwhile, he 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 goes to Persia. He's given asylum by Japan. He goes to Italy. He meets Mussolini, and he finally meets Hitler on November the 28th, 1941. Now, he has two aims. He wants to fulfill his political aims. He wanted to create an Arab army to fight with the Axis because he believed Germany would win the war. And once the war is over, Hitler can solve his Jewish problem for him. And he was useful to Hitler. You see, between 33 and 39, most of the Germans didn't take the Arab war very seriously at all. But there were one or two, and now it seems there could be a coincidence of policy. Why? Because the Mufti can be very useful to the Germans. Why? As a propagandist and also recruiting Muslim units in Bosnia. Think of the Muslims in Bosnia. He
Mm.
created a unit of 20,000 of them. They were attached to the Waffen-SS. They were in actually Lithuania and were involved in many of the appalling roundups of Jews in Lithuania. They were attached to the police. They were involved in security Jews. He also helped boost Wehrmacht divisions with auxiliaries from the Muslim world. So basically, he is a very staunch ally and he knew about the final solution. And I'm going to give you some of his quotes.
I'm just getting up, by the way, the picture of him meeting with Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
And this is, of course, him
This
also
is,
at
this is
the.
what he wrote for the Bosnian Muslim division. The day of judgment will come when the Muslims will crush the Jews completely, and when every tree behind which a Jew hides will say, "There is a Jew behind me, kill me." This is Radio Berlin, the 1st of March 1944, the Arab section. Arabs, rise up as one man and fight for your sacred rights. Kill the Jews wherever you find them. This pleases God, history, and religion. This saves your honor. God is with you. And let me just find.
Just while you're looking for it, this is a quote of the. This is Husseini at the Nazi death camps,
Yes.
learning
Oh,
about
yes. Yeah, yeah.
what they did, and obviously,
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He knew and he encouraged it. And he did something even worse. He stopped the saving of 500 Jewish children. This is his broadcast. It's long, but I
wow.
think you should listen. This is November the 11th, 1942. Before the outbreak of war and before the Axis took up arms to stop the Anglo-Saxon Jewish greed, there was a nation who had fought alone against these forces for more than 20 years. That nation is our own Arab nation, which has fought against the English and the Jews in Egypt, in Palestine, Iraq, in Syria. Of course, there are already uprisings in Egypt, the growth of the Muslim Brotherhood against colonial rule, and in all parts of the Arabian Peninsula. After the outbreak of the present war, our nations continued in their struggle, determined to achieve its aims, that is, liberty, independence, unity, and sovereignty. From the outbreak of this war, the Arab nation has known neither peace nor neutrality. It was engaged alone in the hardest struggle against the Anglo-Saxon Jewish policies. This war was for the Arab people none other than the continuation of an uninterrupted struggle which it had sustained alone for 20 years. Today, the Arab people has at its side the powerful enemies of its own enemy. In this war, the Arabs are not neutral. They cannot be neutral for the reasons I have already given and for the interest they have in the results of this war. If, God forbid, England should be victorious, the Jews would dominate the world. You see, he swallowed it all. He is an
Yeah,
anti-Semite.
yeah. Do you think
Now, I
he
should
became one gradually, or was this sort of there from pretty early on?
I think it was there from quite early on, actually. He thought
Mhm.
Churchill was in the pay of the Zionists.
And do you think it was informed by his, the kind of Islam that he was taught?
Well, it's purist, but it develops. That's the point. But he's seen as a hero to many people, but it should be said moderate Arabs in Palestine loathed him. He'd murdered quite a few of them between 36 and 39 because
Mm.
there was another response. Let
Yeah,
me go on. If, God forbid, England should be victorious, the Jews would dominate the world. England and her allies, don't forget, he'd also been encouraged by British Army officers.
right, right.
England and her allies would deny the Arabs any freedom and independence, would strike the Arab fatherland to its heart, and would tear away parts of it to form a Jewish country whose ambitions would not be limited to Palestine, but would extend to other Arab countries. But if, on the contrary, England loses and its allies are defeated, the Jewish question, which for us constitutes the greatest danger, would be finally resolved. All threats against the Arabs would disappear, and millions of Arabs would be freed, and many Muslims in Asia and in Africa would be freed. So the point is, what the Mufti has done with the creation of the Pan-Arab Congress, the whole story of Islam in the Middle East is now not just about the Arab world, it's about the Muslim world. You see, that's the point. Is it about the Jews in Israel and the Arabs in Palestine? Is it about the axis of the Arab world, Sunni and Shia and all the other sects? Or is it about the whole of the Islamic world? It is the duty of Muslims in general and Arabs in particular to drive all Jews from Arab and Muslim countries. Germany is also struggling against the common foe who oppress Muslims in their different countries. It has very clearly recognized the Jews for what they are and resolved to find a definitive solution for the Jewish danger that will eliminate the scourge that the Jews represent to the world. And as I said, he also tried to stop rescue attempts. He was paid a fortune by the Germans. I think a field marshal was given 25,000 marks a month. He got 50,000 marks a month. So he visits the camp. He is totally behind the final solution. And look at those words. He's saying, throw the Jews out of the Muslim world altogether. He is obsessed now. And at the end of the war, he's actually taken into custody in France. He's under house arrest. But the head of the CID, the British, remember they're fighting the Jews in Palestine now. Remember what happens at the end of the Second World War, when the British refused to open the gates of Palestine. The head of the CID said the Mufti was the only man who could unite the Arabs and cool off the Zionists. So he is back. Oh, I should read this to you as well, because this is important. This is the 25th of July, 1944, letter to the Hungarian foreign minister. Now, this is after the Germans had marched into Hungary. Remember, Hungary was allied to Germany in the war. And it wasn't until April 1944 that the Wehrmacht moved in, and following them was Adolf Eichmann. And between the end of April and July, these figures are unbelievable. Nearly 450,000 Jews were murdered in the 3-month period. Now, Hungarian, and the world knows all about it, and that's when they stopped them for a while. There are protests, you've got a fascist regime, and this is a letter to the Hungarian foreign minister. Permit me to draw your attention to the necessity of preventing Jews from leaving the country for Palestine, and if there be reasons for which their removal necessary, it would be indispensable and infinitely preferable to send them to other countries, Poland, where they would be under proper control. Back in September 43, there had been intense negotiations to actually rescue some kids from the Shoah, 500 of them, from a camp in Italy through Turkey. And he blocked it. He put pressure on the Turks because he said their destination was Palestine. He also constantly urged the Germans to bomb Tel Aviv. Wow. Operation Atlas in the war. This was a mad German operation where the Waffen-SS teamed up with a few German Templars in Palestine, and in cooperation with the Mufti, they tried to make trouble in Palestine for the Jews. So this is the man who spent the war with Hitler and who is not imprisoned as a war criminal because the British think he might be able to control the Arabs. As you've already mentioned, that picture, he visited Sachsenhausen. He knew what was going on. And at the end of the war, he is still the head of the Palestinian Arabs, whether they want it or not. And this is where it gets very, very interesting. Abdullah of Jordan hated him. Look, 45, 46, 47, the British hand the issue of Palestine over to the United Nations, which had been created at the end of the first. You know, the League of Nations was created at the end of the First World War to stop there ever being a war. And then the United Nations was created with the same motive. And, oh goodness, it's so. The word genocide, by the way, was created by a German Jew, a Polish Jew called Raphael Lemkin. He was trying to come to, his family had been murdered. What word can you apply? It means the total obliteration of a whole people. It's unique. Don't ever be fooled by, and of course you aren't, Ollie, but I don't want your viewers to ever be fooled by what that word means, genocide. Today we use it glibly. There was a brilliant Austrian refugee called Karl Popper. He said what the West will always be about now is the meaning of words. Forget philosophy. We've lost the ability. We've lost the ability to think and face the truth, however painful.
Yeah.
And so there's a Palestinian group, a ruling government, and they do appoint him leader, but he is never going to get any support from the other Arabs. They're all fighting each other. And one of the tragedies of Israel, when Israel was created through the will of the United Nations, with Russia and America voting together, think Cold War, the Russian delegate Gromyko astonished the world when he said basically the Jews must have a state. Look at what happened to them. So basically, Israel comes into being, but Abdullah has already made a secret deal with the Jews that, because he had the best army in the Middle East, he wanted the West Bank. He would take, there would not be a Palestine. He hated the Mufti. Gaza took Egypt and sealed the border, and the Mufti took the West Bank, created the refugee. Beg your pardon, not the Mufti. Hussein took the West Bank. No, I'm going mad. The Emir Abdullah took the West Bank and set up the refugee problem. Really. So,
and why did he want it?
Because he wanted the holy sites. He wanted Jerusalem. Because he was like he wanted more land.
But the Arab War of 47 and 48 was to try and wipe off Israel, not just take Gaza and the West Bank.
Not Abdullah. He'd made a secret deal. Abdullah was a wily. It's Abdullah. He's a wily character. He wants to annex the West Bank into Jordan.
But I'm saying was Egypt's plan just to get Gaza, or that's what they ended up with?
They just took it and they sealed it off. Only about 10% of Palestinians were allowed in. You had Farouk of Egypt in control at the time, this very dissolute king who spent most of his time in Monte Carlo. He was the one who said a very famous phrase. He said, by the year 2000, there will only be 5 kings in the world. Clubs, hearts, diamonds. And what's the other one? Clubs, hearts, diamonds. I can't play cards.
Club, hearts, diamonds, and... Oh, it's gone from me as well. I also don't play as well.
And the King of England.
Yeah.
And of course,
that's right.
Later falls, and then you have a fanatical group take over, and there you have Nasser. But the point is, when Israel, in fact, when partition was granted, Israel was invaded. But it was a still British mandate, invaded by an army of Arab irregulars. And when the Jews finally declared statehood, they were invaded by all the surrounding Arabs, including Jordan. But they had this secret deal that they were not going to try and take the whole of it. They would let the Jews have their part, but they wanted the West Bank. So the Mufti, even though he is head of the Arabs of Palestine, the other Arabs all hate him. He loses his influence, except that he goes to Egypt, where after Nasser becomes the head of state, with his dream of United Arab Republic. He was very useful to Nasser in the propaganda department. In fact, there was a really ghastly Nazi called Lears who converted to Islam. He worshipped Hajj Amin, and he became one of the top propagandists in the Zionology department for Nasser, spewing the hatred.
Wow.
And finally he dies in Beirut in 1974. What can I say? You asked a very important question. When did he really become an anti-Semite? How can you tell with these things creep up? I think it's obvious that by the late 20s, early 30s, it was there. And look how it came out in his speeches in Germany. He means it. But he was totally ruthless. He murdered so many moderate Arabs on the way.
But
he's
for me,
a hero in certain circumstances. But you see it meant that the Arabs never had a chance. The Arabs of Palestine, they never had a chance.
And when I look at this picture, and people try to tell me that the whole Israeli-Arab conflict exists because Israel is the chicken and Arab resistance is the egg. Israeli aggression is the chicken, Arab resistance is the egg. I look at that picture before Israel was established, and I just think it's so clearly the other way around.
Israel has Israel has got no designs to take over the Arab world. What does it want it for?
I know. I
You
know,
know, think of
exactly.
the Israeli population, and just think if Hussein, if the Emir Faisal's dream had come true, Lawrence of Arabia wanted it. He believed. Just think what, and Churchill writes about it because he believed. Churchill also overrates the Jews and their talents, but this restless people who were so innovative. There were many Arab leaders, and Churchill definitely, who believed they could bring prosperity to the Middle East.
Yeah,
Can you just
yeah,
imagine if there'd been peace in the Middle East, what a power block could have emerged?
sure. There's nothing inevitable about Jewish and Arab hostility towards one another. There's nothing inevitable about that. And in the end, we will find a resolution. But I do think actually it's going to be a lot of it will have to be come from theological schools of thought that will be able to make room in their heart for a Jewish state, basically.
Well, when you have not all look, think the Abraham Accords, it was so close. And
Yes,
don't you see the one problem, the real problem is that the Arabs, they were so disunited, but there was one thing that could unite them. Think of the power the Mufti had to call the faithful to prayer. He was the
exactly,
Mufti.
exactly, exactly.
And so I think he goes down in history as one of my. I think I would have to say he's certainly in the top 10 of evil leaders as far as I'm concerned.
In Jewish history,
Mm. Oh yeah,
top 10. Wow.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
A different leader, there could have been peace. A different leader,
Mm.
but of course, don't forget the cynicism of the British and the French.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's a
Tr-
dark tale, Ollie, but we've got to take some sort of positive
We
out.
absolutely do. We do. And there are positive developments
When I
happening
think
as well.
the Jewish world is going through a terrible, terrible phase at the moment. And not only are we bleeding for Israel, but we're also having to face the rise of alarming Jew hatred in the West.
Mm.
Because somehow Israel is seen as a white colonialist power. So all those lefties who bleed for the colonials of the British, we're just like them. And also we're tied up with America, and of course the liberal left hate America. So it's so stupid because I used to believe passionately in education. I still do, but I believe in a proper education,
Yeah. Yeah.
an
Exactly.
enlightened
Exactly.
education. You use the word education, and I'm often reminded that the majority of the Einsatzgruppen had PhDs from top German universities. But it's got to be a humanities education, but teaches us to respect the humanity in the other,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
goes for everybody.
That's
Oh
right. We need
goodness.
morality. Well, this has definitely been an educational and morally educational interview and session. I've learned a great deal that I didn't even realize I wasn't aware of. And I know our audience will absolutely love it. Trudy, thank you so much for joining us on JTV. I really encourage you, the viewer, to comment with your thoughts on this discussion, things you'd like us also to mention. By the way, it's clubs, hearts. What was the other one? Clubs, hearts, diamonds, and spades.
Spades.
That's the fourth one.
Nobody
Spades.
ever leaves. No,
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to play cards. I'm so bad with it.
and and lastly, please do comment with other topics you'd like us to discuss. We're thinking about talking about the history of England vis-a-vis Jews as a next topic. I think that's really interesting. But if you have particular topics you'd like Trudy to discuss, I will take a look at the comment section and discuss it with Trudy. So please do let me know, and please comment, and we'll speak further. So thank you so much, and thank you, Trudy.
Can I interrupt you, Ollie, because I want to
Sure,
whet their
sure.
appetite. November the 1st, today, All Saints' Day, go back to 1290. On Tisha B'Av of 1290, the Jews were given 3 months' notice to get out of England. They had to be there. They had to leave before All Saints' Day because no Jew could be there for the day of All Saints, and tomorrow is All Souls.
Wow.
Thought that might
Wow.
amuse you, Oliver.
That is a little taster, the kind of topics we can be discussing. So thank you so much, Trudy.
You are very welcome, Oliver.
If you've made it so far in this video, I have a request for you. JTV has been having a really big impact in spreading the truth about Israel and creating positive associations with the Jewish people, Judaism, and Israel. We've really grown a lot, particularly in the last year, and we're having a really significant impact, both for Jews and non-Jews. But I really want to take JTV to the next level so we can start to compete with the other big online media beasts that are often peddling anti-Israel content. And the way we're going to do that is to scale even faster. So I'd love to build a team where we have other presenters doing shows like me, let's start doing documentaries, supplementary content, animated content, etc., etc. And to do that, I'd like to build a bit of a team. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one fundraising day, just one, where we try and build up some funding in order to fund such a team. Now, to do that, it's going to obviously require people to get involved. And I'm wondering if you would consider, if you're watching JTV content and appreciate what we do and want to help partner with us in taking this to the next level and spreading the truth farther and wider than ever before, I wonder if you'd consider partnering with us simply by running a mini page on the fundraiser that we do, where you just reach out to your contacts on that day that we choose to fundraise and see if they'll all chip in. If you'd be up for doing that, of which I would be so grateful, then please click on the Google form link in the video description of this video, where you can simply just put in a few contact details. It'll be a very small commitment, as I say, literally just one day that we'll all agree upon as a collective community. But the impact is going to be so big. There's such strength in numbers. If we all pull together and do this, we can take this to the next level. And as I say, all of us can partner together in bringing and spreading the truth to the whole world. So please do consider clicking on that link, filling in the form, and I'll be in touch very soon to talk about the next steps. Small commitment, but a big impact. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.